Senator Day.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. Australia's aid budget for 2015-16 suffered a $1 billion reduction, part of a planned total of $11.3 billion in cuts over the forward estimates. If fully implemented, this would, by 2018-19, demote Australia to the lower echelons of the OECD aid contributors. In terms of our official development assistance, that's the ODA, to gross national income, or GNI, ratio at just 0.2% in real terms, or 1% of total government expenditure. Australia would then be the least generous we've been in more than 40 years of our overseas development assistance. Family First opposes further cuts in Australia's aid budget, currently about $4 billion. We are committed to a target of 0.7% of our GNI, or about 3% of total government expenditure, and once reached, to stick to that level. This should be achieved well in advance of the 2030 target year. Over the coming parliamentary term, that's 2016 to 19, our aid budget should be restored to at least $5 billion, or about 0.3% of our GNI, to be on track towards the 0.7% target. Now, I've spoken with the Foreign Minister and with the Finance Minister, and will be speaking further with the government about the same. I recently met with 3 volunteers from the Campaign for Australian Aid, giving up their time and efforts to generate the public and political commitment to a higher level of development aid funding, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. The Australian aid budget has suffered a disproportionate share of recent cuts, some 30%. And for this, I do not blame the Minister, I do not blame anyone. We have to take collective responsibility for the state of the budget and vote to get it in order so we can restore our aid spending. My point is, if we increase our aid spending, we will see an improvement in the budget. As lowering tax rates does not decrease, but increases tax revenue, so an increase in aid spending would improve the budget. Now, here are some of the achievements of Australia's aid program for 1 year alone from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's annual report. 400,000 third world farmers to gain access to better technology. Almost 900,000 women to give birth with the assistance of a skilled attendant. 1 million people to access basic sanitation. 2.9 million people to gain access to safe drinking water. 1.3 million children to enrol in primary school. More than 2.3 million children to be vaccinated against killer diseases. Plus, emergency assistance to millions of people in 24 countries affected by natural disasters. The world is on the cusp of eliminating extreme poverty within a generation. The Millennium Development Goals were negotiated in the year 2000. Their aim was to achieve, among other things, a world that banished extreme poverty by the year 2030. The proportion of people living in extreme poverty, that is on less than the equivalent of $1.90 US per day, halved between 1990 and 2010. New infections and deaths from malaria, TB and HIV/AIDS have been substantially reduced, and attendances in primary schools are now running on average above 90% in developing countries. In 1990, at the time of the UN World Summit for Children, more than 35,000 children under 5 were dying each day from easily preventable causes. Now that figure is around 16,000 per day, still far too many, but well down on the 35,000 in 1990. We are clearly on our way towards eliminating extreme poverty, but the need is still great. Tuberculosis, TB, is a disease that still kills around 1.5 million people annually, mainly young adults, in their most productive years, and is therefore a major drain on the resources of developing nations. This is especially true for our region, with its prevalence of multi-drug resistant forms, which are much more difficult, hence expensive to treat. Diagnostic tools and treatments for TB are decades old, and we have not yet developed an effective vaccine against the disease. More than 3 million children are still dying each year as a direct or indirect result of undernutrition. In East Timor, for example, more than 50% of children are permanently stunted physically and cognitively due to undernutrition. Child deaths from diseases are still alarmingly high. Medical research funding in Australia's aid budget has prioritised TB and malaria. Vaccines are the best value in development, and potential malaria vaccines are currently undergoing clinical trials. However, in order to maintain progress towards combating or even eliminating some communicable diseases, for example polio, replenishments for these very cost-effective and accountable private-public partnerships need to be increased in the near future. This commitment to positive change must be maintained, and we can't have effective Australian government involvement in the regional or global development aid effort without a sustained, workable level of funding for our aid budget. December's mid-year economic and fiscal outlook, MYEFO, is now almost upon us, and there are rumours of further cuts to Australia's aid budget. My premise, consistent with what I've said for many years, is that we should make Australian aid the first item on the budget, not the last. Giving your first dollar brings many rewards, and Australia would greatly benefit from an increase in aid. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Day.